The question is of the environmental impact of these AI data centers that tech firms are building to power the compute processing needed to generate LLMs and respond to queries. George, we ideated this because the New York Times just ran an article this past week, a feature article about Beverly and Jeff Morris, who live in a very rural part of Georgia, who happen to be 1,000 feet from what used to be a forest and is now $150 million meta data center. And George, they were saying that they get their water from wells. Their home is from well water, and the well water they're getting is coming up as brown sludge almost, right? The water's completely contaminated. Meta, of course, denies that had anything to do with their sprawling data center about 1,000 miles away. But George, they've had to replace their appliances like every 2 years for the past like 4 years. And it's becoming untenable. Some days they just don't have water pressure or tap power. And I think, George, this small anecdote does a good job of helping us of teeing up the debate of the environmental impacts of artificial intelligence, which of course does require tons of compute power and tons of new data centers across the country and the world. Just to highlight an example, Amazon is building a new data or built, it's really recently going online, a new data center in Indiana that requires 2.2 gigawatts of electricity, which is enough for 1 million homes. This data center is predominantly built to support the work of Anthropic. So, George, that is the foreground of some of the little anecdotes, but we wanted to kind of tee up a debate because we think that this is a conversation a lot of nonprofits are having. I especially imagine environmentally oriented organizations where staff and the community are probably pretty apprehensive, quite frankly, about, I think, the real environmental concerns of the massive compute power needed by AI companies. So, George, I want to tee up a little bit of a debate. You are going to argue that we're framing this in maybe a too hyperbolic way. And it kind of misses the big picture a little bit. I'm going to frame it in the terms of the more environmental concern angle. So, George, I guess we can go into it. So, George, I just kind of teed up a little bit of a snippet of why AI data centers might be concerning for the environment. What would you add to maybe refute that or kind of add a little bit more context that it's not necessarily as bad as it seems?
I love this because this is what I'm seeing across LinkedIn right now, where some people come out blindly for or blindly against. And the truth is in the middle and in the conversation that should be had about the approach. On this side, though, frankly, I understand that this makes for a good story, and it is sad. It is heartbreaking. It is a N of one. We're talking about one family, which, by the way, there are many families impacted by water shortages for many reasons. Just to give you a little context, though, because I think context is really important because we're talking about one family. The fact that there are folks that are writing about this concern over water, then go ahead and eat, a quarter pounder with cheese, you realize that it takes 1,600 gallons of water per pound of beef. I don't mean to go toward whataboutism. However, it is just fundamentally true that it takes resources to produce the things we consume. And in that context, I would encourage you, if you are genuinely concerned about the issue, to cut out beef, just as an opening thought.
Yeah, I totally hear you, George. But I think also what we're seeing, right, is this strain on communities is new. It's new and it's an acute strain. And we have the example from the Morris family to kind of prove that, George. But some of these new AI data centers are going to need 6+ million gallons per day. And George, that is water that does not get recycled. It basically is used to cool down the computers until it evaporates, right? There's no kind of like, downstream effect where it gets, upcycled and cleaned and processed and sanitized and pushed back into the water system. That water is just used, right? And some communities are talking about, hey, in the future, are we going to need to start rationing water because it's straining local counties, right? That's not to say like in the macro, it's that big a deal, but I think it is a big deal to those local communities. And a lot of these communities, George, or a lot of these data centers rather, are going to start relying on natural gas to power them, which is still a fossil fuel, right? It's not, heavy coal, whatever, but still a fossil fuel, still significantly less carbon efficient or carbon neutral than solar or wind power, for example. So I think there are still real concerns, even within the macro picture. Those concerns might seem a little bit more diluted.
There is a bit of sort of scapegoating here where we're saying the chat that you just did, like, how dare you use AI to answer that question, to summarize that document, to save you time, to help you with that grant proposal? Isn't it, wasteful to be doing this? And I think this argument of like, oh, it takes 1,000,000 gallons of water to create one ChatGPT search. Like, no. So let's just put that in context too, because the truth is these data centers aren't just for your sort of fanfic work with ChatGPT on the weekends. One bottle is roughly like 50 searches or interactions with these chats of water. Or one ChatGPT search is like 2 minutes of streaming video. Pause for a second and take a look at your usage for streaming video. You're listening, you're watching, you're seeing this right now. That also has a cost. And the truth is, like, those chats, and what I don't like is like our organization is not going to use AI because it's inefficient, and you're having this like high and mighty conversation on a Zoom chat. And like, honestly, let's apply resources appropriately. The chatbots are like 3%, roughly speaking, of this like AI energy. There's like algorithms running in the background. There's large companies involved. And there is this displacement of responsibility to the end consumer when actually upstream, literally in December, there's a fantastic announcement actually from Microsoft in articles about their next generation data centers, which have zero water cooling systems. These are still new tech. When new tech comes out, it's just inefficient. Does that mean you stop it before it gets inefficient? Did we sort of say, like, actually, it looks like that Ford Model T is using far more resources than the horse? Like, stop developing it. The first computers were the size of rooms, entire rooms, to do basic math. They get more efficient. We come up with more efficient ways to do it. So I understand bringing and raising the alarm, but like where we apply the pressure, where we apply the judgment, I think matters quite a bit. And when I see this, I worry it has a halting effect on adoption of this sort of endpoint upside for nonprofits, meaning like we're not going to use ChatGPT because it's environmentally not friendly. And we'll conclude this on our Zoom call. Like, pause for a second. And I think it's important to understand the stats.
Yeah, George, I totally agree. And I think in some ways, right, for our nonprofit listeners, it's helpful to disaggregate the argument between your usage of an AI tool versus the on the ground environmental concerns of Amazon or Meta or whatever choosing to place a data center in a particular community, right? Those are related, but also distinct conversations, I think, right? Like, a lot of these warehouses are going into rural communities, particularly poorer rural communities. And there's questions to be had about that, right? But I think to your point, I definitely concede that yes, the onus should not necessarily be passed on to the end user when the reality is all of our tech requires, just as much, if not more, energy to use. I think I'm going to wrap up this debate, George, by saying I think we can hold both these truths at the same time and advocate for like environmental justice for like massive, massive data centers, right? Some of these, George, are like 15,000 acres of land that like tech is just like buying up in like rural Indiana or whatever. And like, obviously, there's going to be community impacts on that, right? And that's an important
internationally,
conversation
unfortunately,
to have.
like the sort
and
of like
internationally, yeah.
getting these communities, rural communities, is no different in less developed countries and regions that are pulling in these massive data centers, and they just, with less regulation, hoover up water, which is frustrating. When I come back to, there are ways, there are more expensive, mind you, to build these closed loop systems of water integrated into data centers. It's just technically more complex, but there are more efficient ways to build it. So where should you apply regulation? Where should you try to push the industry? Is like, great, we're paying attention to it, but the way you do it hopefully isn't just sort of berating the consumer, because I think that is the ultimate failure of the environmentalism movement for the past 30 years.
Yeah, George, I think that's true, right? And you know, you and I having Facebook accounts does not make us complicit in genocide, even though Meta has been credibly accused of
You said it,
fomenting
not me. I
genocide.
still think you're yikes. Right back to
No,
his
well,
thesis.
yeah, right back to my thesis. I think there needs to be nuance, right? It's not necessarily the onus on the end consumer. And I think that's the important takeaway for nonprofits, right? Like your 5-person nonprofit is just not responsible for whatever kind of environmental impacts of Amazon choosing to place a data facility in one location versus another, right? However, you need to communicate with communities, George. So in our newsletter, we actually put in some ideas for communicating with communities. One, you can, I think, talk about the fact, you could talk about some of the stats that we talked about, right? About how AI is, yes, data centers draw a lot of power. Also, so does everything else we do on our laptops, right? It's not unique in that way. And if it helps us process grant applications 3x faster, if we're able to fund more community projects, right? The human impact of this might outweigh, or may very easily outweigh, whatever the detrimental energy consumption of using them might be, right? And I think just calling that out, acknowledging that, can help level set the conversation, because I do think there's a lot of misconceptions around this